Hello, listeners. Today is Friday, January 17th, 2025, and this is Voiceover Work, an audiobook sampler. Where do you listen? If you joined us on this past Monday, you know our book this week is from Nick Trenton. Wait, I Need to Overthink. Today's episode is the chapter-by-chapter preview of this book, where we present the first few minutes of each chapter to give you an idea of the overall content of the book. I hope you find these episodes useful and not too confusing. The book and audiobook are available in all the usual spots, and you can learn more about Nick Trenton at bit.ly/Nick Trenton. Thanks for joining us today. This is the chapter-by-chapter preview of Nick Trenton's book, Wait, I Need to Overthink. Chapter 1, Own What You Feel. Most of us feel anxious about things now and again, and it's not unusual to get carried away with overthinking when it comes to big life decisions or challenging situations. But if you've picked up this book, there's a strong chance that your anxiety goes way beyond this. Chronic and habitual overthinking can damage relationships, interfere with work, and utterly exhaust you in the process. The good news is that this is not something you're doomed to live with forever. Overthinking is a learned behavior, and that means it can be unlearned. In the chapters that follow, we'll be cutting through the angst and chaos and finding the clarity, courage, and compassion needed to live life without undue worry and stress. Whether you struggle with self-regulation now and again, or are dealing with more entrenched thought patterns, the simple and effective approaches covered in this book will help you take back control. When your mind is racing at 1,000,000 miles an hour, it can be hard to know what to do with yourself or where to start. Fortunately for us, the first step is the easiest. All that's required is for us to become aware. What are you feeling? Emotions. Data, not directives. Our first task is to understand our experience, name it, and learn to understand exactly how it functions. You may think, I feel anxious, but what does that word actually mean? If you're an anxious overthinker, anxiety may feel like a messy mix of all of the following: overwhelmed, on edge, irritated and annoyed, nervous, strung out, scared, suspicious, angry, confused, worried, apprehensive, crazy, terrified, uncertain, uncomfortable, weird, exhausted, uneasy. In the moment you're feeling all this, however, these convenient labels don't come to you in a neat bullet point list. They arrive, all at once, in a great tangled mess. And layered on top of that mess are yet more feelings. You're annoyed with yourself, maybe, or disappointed and concerned about how anxious you feel. You're worried about your nervousness. You're overwhelmed with your irritation. You're annoyed at how weird it all feels. On and on it goes. If you've been battling anxiety for a long time, it may seem completely obvious that the only thing you want is not to be anxious anymore. The thought of turning around to face these awful feelings seems insane. Isn't that the point, to feel better? The irony, though, is that when you spend a lot of time desperately trying to run away from feelings, you end up knowing very little about what they are and how they work. You may be emotional without being emotionally intelligent. If you label a certain emotion bad or unacceptable, then you immediately stop yourself from processing or understanding it. Judging, invalidating, ignoring, or repressing emotions doesn't make them go away. In fact, wrestling and struggling against negative emotions only makes things worse, because the wrestling and struggling are... Chapter 2, Find Clarity. Have you ever felt like your mind was quite literally a tangle of words, like 1,000 people all talking at once, or 1,000,000 complicated threads all knotted together? Oh, and everything is also racing at 100 miles an hour? This feeling of overwhelm is extremely common with anxiety and overthinking. The trouble is that our attempts to get out of this tangle often make it worse. We end up thinking more, stressing more, tensing more. What is the way out? In the previous chapter, we briefly mentioned the phenomenon of psychological distance and how useful it can be to see your own thoughts, feelings, and beliefs as somewhat separate from yourself, rather than fusing with them so completely that they become a defining and all-encompassing part of your reality. This is one surefire way to bring a little more clarity to your experience. The clarity we can find is not necessarily the clarity that comes with having a completely calm and quiet mind, but rather the clarity that comes from being able to step away from the noise for a little while. In this chapter, we'll explore a few ways to do that. Unload with free writing. Free writing, or brain dumping, involves unloading any thoughts, anxieties, to-do lists, and emotions onto paper to alleviate stress and free up mental space. It's a form of therapeutic writing that can help manage overwhelming thoughts and emotions by releasing them onto the page. When that anxious, tangled chaos is out there on the page, it can feel as though it's not so much in here anymore. It's easier to deal with. Brain dumps are similar to other types of journaling, offering benefits such as improved mental health and reduced anxiety. Research suggests that regular journaling, including brain dumping, can lead to decreased anxiety and stress, increased resilience, and improved sleep quality. There are no strict rules for brain dumping. It can be done as frequently as desired, with the duration determined by your own individual preference. Regular practice, that means a few times a week, is recommended for the greatest benefits. Here are some steps to getting started. Set a free writing schedule. Choose a time of day that works best for you to engage in free writing. Some people prefer to do it in the morning to clear their minds for the day ahead, while others find it helpful after work to decompress. Some may prefer to brain dump at night before bed so that they can release all tensions and worries that accumulated over the day and have a peaceful night's sleep. Experiment to find a time that suits you best. Write down every idea in any language or format you prefer. Start by writing down every idea that comes to mind about your topic, regardless of how crazy or irrelevant it may seem. Don't judge your ideas at this stage, and remember that no one else will see your free writing. Don't worry about grammar or spelling, and keep reminding yourself that you're not trying to produce anything in particular. Rather, it's about the experience of writing it down. If perfectionism is a problem, you might like to experiment with... Chapter 3, Get Grounded. Understanding your feelings and finding clarity in your thoughts will drastically reduce feelings of overwhelm. Many people will find that these two steps alone can significantly curb their anxious overthinking. In this chapter, we'll consider another approach, which is to ground yourself back to reality. Anxiety is a loose, vague, and fantastical thing of undetermined size and infinite proportions. But the real world right in front of us, however, is a lot smaller and easier to manage. Let's explore how to re-engage with the facts of our reality and deal with the practical issues that may be stressing us out. Don't take your own word for it. Margaret suffers from anxiety and overthinking. She comes home from a casual get-together one day and starts ruminating. When her friends left, Were they laughing with her or at her? Did she say something really stupid? Why did that person look at her that way, and what did it mean? Were they all talking about her right now? She replays certain scenes over again and again in her mind, like an awful video recording, pausing and replaying over the most uncomfortable parts. The whole thing makes her feel almost queasy with worry. A few days later, a friend who went to the same get-together makes a random comment to Margaret, saying, "Well, you certainly made an impression the other night." Margaret bursts into tears, all her worst fears confirmed. "What's wrong?" says the friend. "I was only going to say that a guy there asked me for your number. I think he's interested." Anxiety can warp the way we interpret everything. In a very real way, Margaret created a whole new reality for herself, then stepped into it, assuming it was reality itself. Margaret's anxiety so distorted the way she processed information that she perceived neutral and even positive information as a threat. Rumination has a nasty habit of slowly disconnecting us from reality and inching us closer and closer to our own expectations, assumptions, and fears. That is, unless we make a conscious effort to question ourselves. This process is called reality testing. If you're a media-savvy person, you probably already know not to believe everything you read. This is the same principle, except you're committing to not believing everything you think. Anxious people can get caught in a trap where they constantly engage with their picture of reality and not reality itself. If anxiety becomes pronounced enough and goes on for long enough, life can start to feel really off. You may feel lost, confused, foggy. During intense moments of anxiety, particularly during panic attacks, derealization may occur as a coping mechanism. This phenomenon involves the brain shutting down certain components to deal with overwhelming stress. As a result, people can feel totally disconnected from reality, experiencing sensations of unreality or unfamiliarity with their surroundings. Anxiety-induced cognitive distortions further exacerbate the sense of distorted reality. Chapter 4, Gather Yourself. In Chapter 1, we explored ways to begin taking responsibility and ownership of your own feelings and acknowledging and accepting them for what they are, real. Becoming adept at using your emotions as data and understanding especially how anxiety works, we become masterful at managing our own experience. In Chapter 2, we took a closer look at the content of our beliefs and thought patterns and tried to uncover healthy, useful thinking, even though it may sometimes be hiding in a tangle of rumination and worry. And in Chapter 3, we took a practical and realistic look at one surefire way to tackle anxiety, grounding ourselves in reality. By being realistic about the facts and about our own limits, we teach ourselves to get out of our heads and reconnect with the real world. In this chapter, we're going even deeper and exploring what is arguably your most powerful personal resource, your attention. Your conscious awareness in the moment is, in many ways, all you have. For us overthinkers, the present moment is continually passed over, while our attention gets yanked to the past, the future, or some hypothetical no-man's land that simply isn't real. If catastrophizing, worrying, and panic are a problem for you, then your attention and awareness may be fractured, widely dispersed, or chaotic. In this chapter, we're looking at how to gather ourselves and bring all the threads of our conscious awareness back to the center, which we learn to hold with calm control. The observing mind. Watch thoughts and let them go. In many Buddhist traditions and mindfulness-based approaches like acceptance commitment therapy, ACT, there are two types of mind, the thinking mind and the observing mind. We can only be in one or the other, never both at the same time. The thinking mind is characterized by constant chatter, self-talk, interpretations, judgments, guesses, impulsive reactions, and arguments. Most often, this internal chatter is just noise and clutter. But for those of us with anxiety issues or the habit of overthinking, this constant mental churning can create emotional distress. As we've seen in previous chapters, our thoughts act like a filter between us and reality, telling us what reality means and so prompting certain emotional reactions. This filter is a product of the thinking mind, which is capable of generating infinite thoughts, theories, stories, and beliefs. The observing mind, on the other hand, simply watches without judgment or engagement. It refers to a state of mindfulness where people are able to observe their thoughts without getting caught up or entangled in them. It involves cultivating an awareness of one's thoughts, emotions, and sensations without judgment or attachment. Instead of trying to suppress or control thoughts, people in an observer mind state practice acceptance and non-reactivity to whatever arises in their internal experience. It's important to understand what is meant here by attachment. One day you may be meditating and think to yourself, "Wow, look how calm and zen I'm being. I'm so good at meditation." This might make you feel a warm sense of pride and superiority. This positive. Chapter 5. Be still. For some people, stress is like water off a duck's back. What exactly is it about such people that allows them to remain so calm, at ease, and relaxed, whatever shape life takes around them? In this chapter, we're looking at what it means to not just temporarily overcome stress and anxiety, but to live a life of peace, poise, and purpose, whatever happens. After years in therapy, Tara had a major insight. She realized that all the people she admired actually did not have lives any easier than hers. She finally understood that these people did not have simple, perfect, eternally comfortable lives. Far from it. Rather, what was clear was that they had a very particular way of responding to their lives, which were filled with all the same obstacles, stresses, annoyances, and unknowns that she found in her own life. Like many people, Tara had been unconsciously waiting for her life to finally be fixed and resolved once and for all. She is a perfectionist and had never stopped striving for some ideal end state where her life would be smooth and correct and she would no longer have to worry about anything. The big epiphany hit her one day. Her life would never be perfect. She would have to find a way to relax and be at ease with her life just as it was, right now. All at once, she looked at her idols with a new perspective and became curious not about how they managed to be perfect, but how they managed to be happy despite not being perfect. She realized that they didn't have everything under control, but had learned to take conscious action and be content anyway. Tara now believes that this is, in fact, an underappreciated life skill. The courage to be calm and well in the midst of a life that is forever incomplete, imperfect, and uncertain. Wabi-sabi, mindful imperfectionism. Perfectionism is all about holding impossibly high standards. It naturally implies a degree of failure, because if your standards are high enough, then it's actually impossible to reach them, i.e., simply holding that standard means you will fail to meet them. Thus, perfectionists are often also procrastinators. If you have a lofty standard to reach and know you cannot possibly reach it, it's obvious that you would avoid ever starting. For the worst perfectionists among us, they may talk themselves into a state of paralysis. From within this mindset, It is logically consistent to never do anything, but merely to continue to have high standards. You could end up with a well-groomed and highly principled hypothetical life, but your real life never quite gets off the ground. Individuals holding perfectionistic tendencies often experience chronic pressure to achieve flawlessness, leading to constant anxiety and negative self-talk. Even when they do achieve, they automatically discount it and never celebrate their accomplishments. They always could have done more. The fear of making mistakes, coupled with a lack of resilience in the face of adversity, only results in heightened stress levels, which, ironically, makes you far less effective and far less likely to do your best. As you can guess, overthinking plays an important role in this cycle. The expectation of... Chapter 6, Move Forward. Stress and overthinking can be managed. With effort, patience, and compassion, anxiety can be treated and gradually unlearned. The ultimate goal, however, is to live a life where we are not constantly defining ourselves in terms of what we are worried about. At some point, we can abandon anxious thought patterns entirely and start to get curious about how we want to grow, create, and change, i.e., how we want to move forward in life. Anxiety can be incredibly distressing, but arguably the worst thing about it is all the things it prevents you from having, such as spontaneity, joy, confidence, exuberance, bravery, and authenticity, to name a few. In our final chapter, we're looking at ways to move on from anxiety, specifically, better ways to make decisions, take inspired action, and solve life's problems in ways that will bring you real change and growth. Overchoice. How to avoid analysis paralysis. Michelle doesn't really consider herself an overthinker or an anxious person, with one important exception. She hates having to make decisions. If she has to go shopping for something, choose a tradesman to do work in her home, or pick a TV series to watch, she quickly finds herself drawn into a spiral of stress that doesn't have an end. She tries as hard as she can to make the best decision, but the more she attempts to whittle down the options and carefully weigh everything up, the more flustered and overwhelmed she gets. Eventually, she becomes so annoyed that she just picks something, anything, as long as it means no longer having to keep analyzing the options. Michelle's anxiety around this overchoice means she has avoided making big house moves or going on complicated travel adventures, and she often finds herself deferring to other people so that they just make the choice for her, with mixed results. Sometimes the anxiety isn't even relieved by making a decision anyway, and she finds that her worries just shift focus. Did I choose the right thing? What would have happened if I had chosen the other thing? Analysis paralysis happens whenever people are presented with an overwhelming number of choices or possibilities, leading to difficulty in making decisions. In Michelle's case, this represents a very particular kind of overthinking and rumination, one that is triggered and exacerbated by an overabundance of information in the environment. For some of us, uncertainty is an anxiety trigger, and for others, anxiety crops up most after a stressful event. For Michelle and other sufferers of analysis paralysis, the trigger is an array of options that are simply too great to properly process. Plenty of choice may seem like a good thing, but the paradox of choice refers to the phenomenon where having an abundance of options can actually lead to feelings of paralysis, stress, and dissatisfaction, rather than freedom and satisfaction. The more options, the more there is to think about, and the greater the chance that you'll miss out on the best one. Barry Schwartz, an expert on this phenomenon, describes how the presence of too many choices can overwhelm people's cognitive processes, causing them
time you open up your browser, take a minute, point it to bit.ly/Nick Trenton to learn more about today's featured author. You can sign up for some free materials, get on his mailing list there if you'd like, and you can visit Audible and Amazon or iTunes to find more works by Nick Trenton. Today's book, Wait, I Need to Overthink, is available at those vendors as well, of course. Thanks for joining us today, and we'll see you next Monday, where we'll preview another audiobook. Have a great weekend.